I never thought I'd end up in prison. Nobody does, I guess. But there I was at 23 years old, walking through those heavy metal doors, hearing them slam shut behind me with a sound that still echoes in my dreams sometimes. I'd made mistakes, stupid ones, the kind that happen when you're young and angry and don't know how to deal with the world. The judge gave me 8 years. 8 years that felt like a lifetime stretching out ahead of me. They assigned me to a cell with a guy named Theo. I'll never forget the first time I saw him. He was sitting on the bottom bunk, reading a book, and when I walked in carrying my thin mattress and the small box of my belongings, he looked up with these grey eyes that seemed to see right through all my defenses. He was older than me, maybe early 30s, with dark hair that was already showing hints of silver at the temples. He had this quiet presence about him, like he'd already made peace with something I was still fighting against. "You can have the top bunk," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm Theo." "Reed," I managed to say, my throat tight with fear and anger and 100 other emotions I couldn't name. Those first few weeks were the hardest of my life. I was terrified, though I'd never admit it. I'd put on this tough exterior, acting like nothing could touch me, like I didn't care about anything or anyone. But at night, lying on that top bunk staring at the ceiling, I'd feel panic creeping in. The walls seemed to close in on me. The sounds of the prison, the shouting and the clanging of metal, the constant noise, it all felt like it was crushing me. Theo never pushed. He'd just be there, reading his books or writing in a journal he kept hidden under his mattress. Sometimes he'd make casual conversation, asking me simple questions about where I was from, what kind of music I liked. Nothing heavy, nothing that required me to reveal the raw wounds I was carrying. One night, about a month in, I broke down. I tried to do it quietly, turned toward the wall, but the sobs came anyway. I felt pathetic, weak, everything I'd been trying not to be. And then I heard Theo's voice from below, soft in the darkness. "It's okay to not be okay in here," he said. "This place, it strips you down to nothing. But that doesn't mean you're nothing. You understand?" I didn't answer, couldn't answer, but something in his words cracked something open inside me. After that night, things shifted between us. I started actually talking to him instead of just grunting responses. He told me he was 4 years into a 10-year sentence for something he still maintained he didn't do. He'd been a teacher before, high school English, and he talked about his students with this warmth that made me realize how much he'd lost. "What do you miss most?" I asked him one day during yard time. We'd started walking the perimeter together, our own small routine. He thought about it for a moment, his eyes distant. "The freedom to just be myself," he said. "To walk into a coffee shop and order something complicated. To stay up late reading without someone telling me when the lights go out. To have a conversation that isn't monitored or judged." He paused, then added quietly, "To maybe someday find someone to share my life with." There was something in the way he said that last part, a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "You never had that?" "Someone." "Almost," he said, a sad smile crossing his face. "Once. But I was too scared. Scared of what people would think, what I might lose. My job, my family's approval. So I let him go, and then I ended up here anyway, losing everything I was trying to protect." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. "Don't waste your life being afraid, Reed. That's the real prison." I thought about his words constantly over the following months. I'd never really let myself think about my own feelings, my own truth. Growing up, I'd pushed down anything that didn't fit the narrow definition of who I was supposed to be. I'd gotten into fights, acted out, built walls so high nobody could see the real me. And maybe I couldn't see the real me either. But living in that small cell with Theo, I couldn't hide anymore. I noticed things about him, the way his hands moved when he talked about books he loved, the rare smile that transformed his whole face, the kindness he showed to everyone even in this harsh place. I noticed how I felt when he was near, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature, a comfort I'd never experienced before. It scared me to death. One evening, we were both lying in our bunks, and Theo was telling me about this book he'd just finished, something about two men during World War II who found love in the midst of chaos. His voice was animated, passionate, and I found myself hanging on every word, not because of the story, but because of him. "You ever think about what you'll do when you get out?" I asked, interrupting his story. He was quiet for a moment. "Every day. I think about getting a small place somewhere, maybe near the ocean. Teaching again if they'll let me, or maybe just working in a bookstore. Something simple and honest." He paused. "What about you?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't even know who I am, let alone what I want to do." "You have time to figure it out," Theo said gently. "And for what it's worth, I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for." "I'm not brave," I said, my voice rough. "I'm terrified all the time." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. Bravery is being scared and still showing up, still trying. You do that every day." Something in me broke open then, and before I could stop myself, I said, "Theo, I need to tell you something." I heard him shift in his bunk below. "Okay." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "I've been feeling things about you, and I don't know what to do with it. I've never felt this way about anyone, and it's terrifying because we're in here and there's no future, and I don't even know if you—" I stopped, realizing I was rambling. The silence stretched out, and I wanted to take it all back, to pretend I'd never said anything. Then I heard Theo climbing up to my bunk, something we weren't supposed to do but nobody really enforced at night. He sat on the edge, and in the dim light from the corridor, I could see his face. "Reed," he said softly, "I've been feeling the same way. For months now, but I didn't want to put that on you, didn't want to make your time here any harder." "Really?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Really?" He reached out and took my hand, his fingers warm and solid and real. "But we have to be careful. This place, it's not kind to people like us." I know. And I did know. I'd seen what happened to inmates who showed any kind of vulnerability, any kind of difference. But right then, with Theo's hand in mine, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, even if where I was supposed to be was a prison cell. We became everything to each other after that. We were careful, never showing anything in public, keeping up the appearance of just being cellmates. But in the privacy of our cell, we'd talk for hours, sharing our histories, our dreams, our fears. He'd read to me from his books, and I'd listen to his voice like it was music. Sometimes we'd just hold hands in the darkness, finding comfort in that simple connection. Theo taught me things, not just from books, but about life, about being honest with yourself, about finding beauty even in the ugliest circumstances. He showed me that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, that letting someone in didn't mean losing yourself. And slowly, I started to become someone I actually liked, someone I could respect. We made plans. Impossible plans, maybe, but plans nonetheless. When we both got out, we'd find each other. We'd build a life together, the life Theo had always dreamed about and the life I was just starting to imagine for myself. "Promise me something," Theo said one night about 2 years into my sentence. We were lying side by side in his bunk, whispering in the darkness. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, we'll find each other on the outside." "I promise," I said, and I meant it with everything in me. "Where should we meet?" He thought about it. "There's this lighthouse up in Maine, near a town called Pemaquid Point. I went there once, years ago, and it was the most peaceful place I'd ever seen. The lighthouse sits on these rocks overlooking the ocean, and you can hear the waves crashing. It felt like the edge of the world, like a place where you could start over." "Pemaquid Point," I repeated. committing it to memory. When? My release date is April 15th. Let's say exactly 10 years from then. April 15th at noon. That gives us both time to build our lives, to become the people we want to be. And if we still want this, still want each other, we'll meet there. Why wait 10 years? I asked, even though part of me understood. Because I want you to be sure, Theo said, his hand cupping my face in the darkness. I want you to live your life, experience the world, figure out who you are without these walls around you. If after all that, you still want what we have, then we'll know it's real. It's already real, I insisted. I know, but promise me anyway. Promise me you'll take that time. I promise, I whispered, and we sealed it with a kiss that tasted like hope and heartbreak all at once. Theo was released 8 months later. I wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt, watching him walk out of that cell for the last time. He couldn't say much, couldn't do anything that would draw attention, but he squeezed my shoulder and said, April 15th, 10 years. Don't forget. I won't forget, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'll be there. And then he was gone, and the cell felt impossibly empty. I still had 5 years left on my sentence. 5 years of remembering every conversation, every moment, every promise we'd made to each other. Those years were the longest of my life, but I used them the way Theo would have wanted me to. I got my GED, took every class the prison offered, worked on becoming someone I could be proud of. I thought about him every single day, wondering where he was, what he was doing, if he was thinking about me too. And I counted down to April 15th, the date that had become my North Star, my reason for pushing forward. When I finally got released, the world felt overwhelming. Everything was too bright, too loud, too fast. I'd gone in at 23 and come out at 31, and the world had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined, but I'd made a promise to Theo and to myself. I'd take the time, build a life, become someone worthy of what we'd had. I moved to Portland, got a job in construction, found a small apartment. I went to therapy, worked through the trauma of prison and everything that had led me there. I came out to my family, which went better than I'd feared, but not as well as I'd hoped. I dated a little, but nothing ever felt right. Nobody was Theo, and maybe that wasn't fair, but it was the truth. The years passed, 5 years, 7 years, 9 years. I built a good life for myself, a life I was proud of. I had friends, a job I didn't hate, a sense of peace I'd never had before. But through it all, April 15th was always there in the back of my mind, getting closer and closer. I tried to find Theo online, but he'd stayed completely off social media. I didn't even know if he was still alive, if he remembered our promise, if he'd moved on and forgotten about the guy he'd shared a cell with all those years ago. The uncertainty was torture, but I'd made a promise, and I was going to keep it. As the 10-year mark approached, I started to get nervous. What if he didn't show up? What if he did show up, but we'd both changed so much that what we'd had was gone? What if the whole thing had just been a prison romance, something that couldn't survive in the real world? But I'd made a promise, so I took time off work, rented a car, and drove up to Maine. I arrived in Pemaquid Point the day before, April 14th, and found a small bed and breakfast near the lighthouse. I barely slept that night, my mind running through every possible scenario. The next morning, April 15th, I woke up early. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and the wind coming off the ocean was cold. I put on my best jeans and the blue sweater I'd bought specifically for this day, and I walked down to the lighthouse. It was just as Theo had described it, beautiful and wild and peaceful. The lighthouse stood white and proud on the rocks, and the ocean stretched out endlessly, grey-blue and churning. I checked my phone. It was 11:30. I had 30 minutes to wait. I sat on one of the rocks, watching the waves crash, and I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The mistakes I'd made, the years in prison, meeting Theo, the promise we'd made, the life I'd built. Whatever happened in the next 30 minutes, I was grateful for all of it, because it had made me who I was. 11:45. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked closer to the lighthouse. There were a few tourists around, taking pictures, but I barely noticed them. My entire focus was on watching for him, for any sign that he'd come. 11:55. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes until I found out if the last 10 years of hope had been for nothing. And then I saw him. He was walking up the path toward the lighthouse, his hands in his pockets, his hair now more silver than dark. He was wearing a gray jacket, and even from a distance I could see he was scanning the area, looking for someone, looking for me. Our eyes met, and the world stopped. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other across the distance, and I saw my entire future in his eyes. Then we were both moving, walking fast, and then running, and suddenly he was in my arms, and I was holding him, and it felt like coming home after the longest journey imaginable. "You came," I said, my face buried in his neck, breathing him in. "Of course I came," Theo said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised. Did you think I wouldn't?" "I didn't know," I admitted, pulling back to look at his face. He'd aged, we both had, but he was still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "I hoped, but I didn't know." "I've thought about you every single day for 10 years, he said, his hands cupping my face. "Every single day, Reed. I built a life, just like we said. I teach again at a community college. I have an apartment overlooking the ocean. I've been happy, but there's been this Theo-shaped hole in my life, waiting for this day, waiting to see if you'd be here." "A reed-shaped hole," I corrected with a watery laugh. "And I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." We stood there on those rocks, holding each other as the waves crashed around us, and the wind whipped through our hair, and I felt a completeness I'd never experienced before. 25 years had passed since the day I'd walked into that cell and met Theo. 25 years of growing and changing and becoming, and all of it had led to this moment. "So what now?" I asked, still not quite believing this was real. Theo smiled. That rare, beautiful smile I'd fallen in love with in a prison cell. "Now we keep our promise. We build the life we talked about all those years ago. Together." "Together," I repeated, and kissed him there under the lighthouse, sealing a new promise for whatever came next. We spent the rest of that day talking, catching up on 10 years of life, filling in all the gaps. Theo had indeed gotten his place near the ocean, in a small town in Maine not far from where we were. He taught English at a community college and spent his free time writing, something he'd always wanted to do. He'd had a few relationships, but nothing serious, nothing that made him want to break our promise. I told him about my life in Portland, about the work I'd done on myself, about coming out and building a life I was proud of, about the therapy and the hard conversations and the slow process of becoming someone I could respect, about how I'd dated but never found what I was looking for because I was looking for him. "I have something for you," Theo said as we sat on the rocks, watching the sun start to descend toward the horizon. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn notebook, the same journal he'd kept in prison. "I wrote in this every day we were apart, every thought, every memory, every moment I wished you were there. I want you to have it so you know you are never forgotten." I took the journal with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the weight of it, the years of devotion it represented. "Theo, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come home with me," he said simply. "Say you'll give us a real chance out here in the world where we can actually be together." I looked at him, at this man who'd seen me at my absolute worst and loved me anyway, who'd waited 10 years on the promise of a future we'd dreamed up in a prison cell. And I knew with absolute certainty that this was what I'd been waiting for my entire life. "Yes," I said. "Yes to all of it." We left Pemaquid Point as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and drove to Theo's apartment together. It was a small place, cozy and filled with books, with windows overlooking the ocean just like he'd said. And as we stood in his living room, holding each other as darkness fell outside, I realized that we'd done it. We'd kept our promise. We'd found our way back to each other across 25 years, across all the obstacles and uncertainties and fears. That was 5 years ago. We're still together, still building the life we dreamed about. I moved to Maine, found work here, and we got a bigger place together, one where we can both spread out and breathe. Theo's still teaching, and I've started taking classes myself, thinking maybe I'll become a counselor, help other people who've been through what I went through. We're not perfect. We have hard days and disagreements and moments when the past creeps in. But we have each other, and we have the knowledge that we've already survived the worst and came out the other side. We kept a promise that seemed impossible, and that means we can do anything. Sometimes I think about that terrified 23-year-old kid walking into a prison cell, and I wish I could tell him that everything's going to be okay, that he's going to meet someone who'll change his life, who'll show him what love really means, that he's going to become someone he can be proud of, that 25 years later, he'll be happy in ways he never imagined possible. The promise we made in that cell wasn't just about meeting at a lighthouse. It was a promise to become the people we wanted to be, to live authentically, to believe in love even when everything else seemed hopeless. And we kept it. Against all odds, through all the years and all the uncertainty, we kept it. And that's the thing about promises, about real love. It's not about the grand gestures or the perfect moments. It's about showing up day after day, year after year, and choosing each other over and over again. It's about believing in something bigger than yourself, even when you can't see the path forward. Theo's calling me from the kitchen now, asking if I want coffee. In a minute, I'll go join him, and we'll sit on our porch overlooking the ocean, and we'll talk about our day, about nothing and everything. And I'll be grateful, like I am every single day, that I walked into that cell 25 years ago and met the man who would teach me how to live, how to love, and how to keep a promise that changed everything.